First of all, I just want to thank everyone for joining in today. We're gonna learn Git version control and GitHub, and we're gonna see how both they can both be integrated together. This is absolutely beginner level, so please don't worry if you have no experience with version control at all. We're gonna be practicing some of the commands, so we won't go too much into the theory behind Git, but rather we will actually use it and see how it works. And we'll also go over how to set up some of the software so that way you can follow along. All right, so um, we'll cover the software requirements for the overview, and we'll also have explain Git version control. And GitHub will go over the portfolio website application at the end, and then we'll also have a Q&A. But if at any time you guys want to ask questions, please feel free to do so at any moment as I'm presenting. You can type it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask your question. All right, cool. So here are the links for system requirements. The first bullet is for Git. I believe you can just go on Google and type in Git download, and it should be the first link that's available. And then for the text editor, you can download whatever text editor that you prefer. We have Atom and Visual Studio Code listed, but there are also other text editors available as well. And we recommend that you also have a GitHub account. And so, yeah. So that being said, let's go through the installation for Git, because there is a configuration that is very helpful. So that way you can use the bash command. So here I have the Git downloads page, and I actually downloaded it before this workshop, but go ahead and select whichever operating system that you're using to download Git. And hopefully it shouldn't take too long. I don't think so. I think it'll be pretty quick. And then let's go to downloads. Okay, just open up here. Okay, so for a lot of the configuration is default, so we can just go ahead and hit next. See, I believe there's something in the chat. Okay, for Mac, Krimika, I believe. So for Mac, I'm not too sure about that system, because I am using Windows, Krimika, but we can talk afterwards, and then I'll help you configure that. So for right now, you can follow along. I believe that the bash for Mac is very similar to the one on Windows, so you can still see what kind of commands that we will use. So we can go over setting that up after the workshop. And so now we'll go ahead. Yeah, absolutely. So now we'll go ahead and just check off the default. So here, if anyone has this dialog for their setup open, I highly recommend checking off for Windows these two here, Git GUI for the GUI, and then Git bash. But more importantly, we want to have Git bash checked off, because that's what we'll use to run the Git commands on a terminal. The GUI is kind of more for the visual interface, which we won't be using much, but I highly recommend that you check off this one here, so that way we can run the commands on the command prompt. And then everything from there is pretty much just all default. So we'll just go next, and then next. And then again, we'll just keep this all to default. credential helper. And for this option, you can, if you want, you don't have to have the credential helper. So if you want to, that's totally fine. All right. And so if you followed along, um, oh, I see, Denise, you have a Mac as well. Yeah, so for the Mac setup, I'm actually not too familiar with. Let's see what happens once we hit Mac. Okay. Oh, I see. So there's several different setups for Mac if you haven't done. Okay. Apple ships a binary installer. Okay. So yeah, unfortunately, I'm not too familiar with setting up for Mac. So, oh, okay, awesome. Okay. Yeah, so if you follow these steps here, I believe it should help you out. But if not, I'm not too familiar with Mac, so I apologize. But I can help you guys after the workshop. But I believe that the command prompt will be very similar. So we'll go ahead and continue on. And then once you reach this page, you can go ahead and install. Okay. And that's okay for me. I'm not able to install for whatever reason, but I have Git already on my machine. So now we'll go ahead and begin covering the commands. So actually, before we cover the commands, we'll actually talk about the difference between Git and GitHub. So Git is a free and open source distributed version control system. And as we saw earlier, it's a free download and it's open source, so it's available to the public and you can use it on various machines. GitHub, on the other hand, is a central place for sharing and contributing code. And with Git, the difference between Git and GitHub is that with Git, you're actually able to track your changes in source code during software development. And also with GitHub as well, you're able to see the changes that you or your teammates make when you're working on a project. And a fun fact about Git is that the original author of Git is also the original author of Linux, whose name is Linus Torvalds. He actually created Git to help him while he was working on the Linux operating system. And so just to kind of get a motivation for why we want to learn Git and GitHub in the first place, let's start with Git. One of the really great reasons to learn Git is that it allows you to track different versions of your software. So for instance, have you all ever been in that situation where you've been in an English class and you have to turn in an essay, but for that particular essay, you have multiple versions. You have your draft, and then you have your final draft, and then you have your final draft. You have multiple versions, right? So what Git allows you to do is have a central repository for the different versions of whatever it is that you're working on. And so if we're working on, let's say, a software project, we can use Git to track our changes, and we don't have to create multiple copies of our folder or our project that we're working on. We can just have one project and allow and use Git to help us track the changes that we make. And GitHub is really great thing to get involved in because it's like the Facebook for code. With GitHub, you can go and you can check out projects that other people are working on. You can see their repository and see what kind of projects that they have. And if there's something that you're trying to learn, you can go on GitHub and search for whatever it is that you're trying to make. So for instance, when I started learning Git and GitHub, one of the things I really wanted to develop was a portfolio website. And I didn't know how to do that. So I went on GitHub and I searched up portfolio website in the search tool. And I found all these great repositories consisting of projects. and I downloaded one that helped me learn. And I'm also using GitHub now for my senior project, so that way I can collaborate with my teammates. So there's actually a question from Antonio Ojeda. It is, what's the difference between Git and GitHub? So the Git is a open source source version control software. It's a version control software. So what that allows you to do is track changes in the software that you make, and it allows you to um, essentially do that, track the different changes in the software that you make. It all starts with Git, but with GitHub, on the other hand, that's a remote repository. So you can think of it as a place where you can upload whatever is on your computer and share it with the world. And so, as I was saying earlier with GitHub, you can go and you can view projects from other people, and you can also collaborate with your teammates. But Git, on the other hand, is more so for tracking the changes that you make on your own computer. So I hope that answers your question, Antonio. Thank you for asking that question as well. And so now we'll go over Git workflow. So I know this image looks kind of weird, and if you're not familiar with anything, that's totally fine. Again, we'll go over the commands, and they'll be a lot more clear. But looking at this image, we can kind of see an overview of how the workflow begins. To the very far left, we have in like a cylinder shape, that's actually a representation of a repository. So a workspace repository is where you have anything that you're working on. And then to the right of that, in the orange color, is a staging area. And so a staging area is where you put anything that you want Git to anything that you want Git to be aware of. So that way it knows that whenever you make a change to that particular file, or let's say folder, Git will notify you and tell you that you have made changes for it. Essentially what it's doing is it knows that you're making changes to something. And then to the very right of the staging repository in the green color is local repository. And that is where Git knows of all the versions that you have made. So this would kind of be like the area where you have different drafts. Like going back to the essay example, let's say you finish your essay draft, your first draft, you would store that draft in there, and Git would know that we have a first draft available. And as you make progress to that first draft, let's say you come up with a second version and you're done with that version, you can also have that uploaded to the local repository. So that's how Git knows the different types of versions that you have. And to the very far right of all three of those repositories is your remote repository. And again, this is essentially what GitHub is it's a remote repository, and it's available to everyone online. It essentially isolates whatever you have on your computer versus everything that's available on GitHub. And with that division, you can upload your code and your working software to a remote repository. So that way anyone in the world who has an internet connection can see that. And in some cases, they might not even be able to see that, because with GitHub, you can also create private repositories. So that way it's not accessible to everyone. But a large chunk of the repository is open to the public. And that's why many times you'll hear the phrase open source, because anyone can go in and check whatever's out there. Okay, cool. So now we're going to start our we're going to go over our very first command, which is called git init. But before we do that, we're going to use GitHub to clone a repository, or actually not clone a repository, but to download a repository. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll go over to GitHub, and I'm going to share a link in the chat here. So that way it'll be this, link that's in the chat. If you guys want to follow along, you can visit that link there and download the repository. And what that repository is a portfolio website template. And it has all the HTML and CSS code for you to modify and create your own portfolio website. And to do that, once you visit the link, there's this green button here. And so once you hit that drop down and you hit download zip, it'll go ahead and download the entire repository to your computer. So I'll give you guys some time to go ahead and do that. And so once you go ahead and download the repository, so it should be saved in your downloads as a zip folder. You can go ahead and extract it. I'll go ahead and extract mine real quick in the desktop. So let me just go ahead and do that. Desktop. Oh, looks like I already have it available. Okay. Actually, just kidding. I have it on my desktop. So here it is. Actually, this is the one. I have way too many repositories. Sorry, guys. Okay, here it is. And then if you have Visual Studio Code, what's nice about it is that once you find the project that you want to work on, you can right click and then hit open with code. And if you don't have Visual Studio Code, that's totally fine. You can just open it any way that you prefer. Okay, let me go ahead. And so now, if we look at the Git folder, or sorry, not the Git folder, but if we look at the project folder, we can see the various folders, the subfolders that exist. So for instance, we have Bootstrap, CSS, HTML, and all these other folders and content. So, but one thing that's missing to help us keep track of our software, so that way we can keep track of the various changes in it, is Git. And so in order for us to use Git so that way we can keep track of the changes that we make, we have to run a particular command inside of this project directory. And so to do that, going to the project directory, we can right click it, and then it'll give us this option here, which says git bash. And so what that will do is it'll open up a command prompt at that particular path for your project directory. And so if I were to run ls is a command on Windows that lists all the contents of a folder. So it'll print out these contents here. And so now, if we want Git to go ahead and track our changes for us, we need to initialize the Git repository. And there's a question from Antonio. So it says, where do we go to go into code? Okay, so that's a great question, Antonio. So that option is only available if you have the Visual Code text editor. And I believe that also depends on how you installed Visual Studio Code. So it's more of a shortcut. If you don't have that option when you right click the project directory, that's totally fine. You can just open it up on whatever text editor that you're using, and you should be good. But it's just more of a shortcut though, so you don't have to worry about it. And so now that we're inside of our project directory and we want to use Git, we can go ahead and run git init. So git init, let's see what happens. So it responds with initialize empty Git repository. And so again, this is what enables us to use Git to track our changes. So when we go back to the project folder, we'll see this folder here, .git, and that's actually the folder that Git uses to track all of our changes. And also for those of you who are using the bash for the first time, you may not be able to run the git init command because you probably have to configure it first. So if it is giving you some form of error for not running the git init command, one troubleshooting measure that you can do is run these two commands here, both separately. So you can run git config -- global username, and then double quotes followed by your name, and then config global user.email followed by your email. Okay. Um, so Antonio, did you run git init on the project folder inside of the git bash? So you have to run git init. Okay. So you should be able to see the git folder if you run that. It could be because you haven't configured git. So to do that, I would recommend running these two commands here. Let me go ahead and copy and paste them. So if you run those commands separately on the bash, it should help out. Yeah. Okay, cool. So now there's another command that's available for us called git status. And as it shows, git status allows us to view all changes made in working directory. So if we go ahead and this is here. So since we initialized, yeah, so Antonio, you would do each of the commands separately. So the first command, you would do git config global username, and after you're done configuring that command, you would then run the second one. So you wouldn't do it all at once. You would do them separately, and then in where it says John Doe, you would just replace that with whatever username you want to use. And then same thing goes for the email as well. And so now, since we initialized our Git repository, if we go ahead and run git status, it'll show us in red all the different files that are untracked. So for instance, it'll show the bootstrap folder, CSS, HTML, index. And so Git is telling us that it's not tracking whatever changes that we make in these files because they haven't been added to the staging area. And so we'll go ahead and get into that here. So these two commands here, git add, these commands are used to add files into our Git repository. So that way, into the staging repository. So that way Git knows that what files to start tracking, because right now it's not aware of these files here. So we can go ahead and add them. We're just going to open and the code is there, but what do we need to do with that? Okay. So once we go ahead and run git add followed by a period, this will go ahead and get all of those untracked files and place them into the staging repository. So that way Git knows that we have files that we want to track. And we can also do all the files individually, but of course that does take some time, but I can show you guys an example. So we can do something like git add and then index.html. Since that's a file that isn't being tracked, it'll go ahead and add that file into the staging area. And when we run git status to see the status of the Git repository, we can see that we just added index.html. So that means that Git knows that we want to track changes whenever they occur in that index.html file. But since we want to track every change that exists in our project, we'll go ahead and run git add followed by a space and a dot, meaning that we want to go ahead and track all the files. Okay, cool. So once we go ahead and do that, Git knows that we want to track all those changes. So let me just maximize this. Let me clear this. Okay, so if we run git status, notice now in green, we have these new files that have all been added to the staging area. So Git knows that we want to track them. And now we'll look at the next command. So the next command is git commit. So git commit, what that allows us to do is record changes and store them into the local Git repository. And this goes back to when I was explaining how we can track the different versions of our software with Git. So Git, when we run the commit, it's almost like it's taking a snapshot of the current repository. And so that way it knows everything at a particular instance in time, how everything looked in a particular folder, how everything was. And it's best to always use a very descriptive message so that way we can see what we recorded. And so here we'll go ahead and run git commit -m, and then inside the double quotes, we'll have a commit message. Since this is the first time we're having a commit, we'll go ahead and say initial commit. Okay, awesome. So now inside of the local repository for Git, it has a snapshot of the current version of the software, which is our initial commit. And if we run git status, it will tell us about the branch we're on, and it says nothing to commit because we already have all of our recorded changes. Okay, cool. So for this command here, git log, it allows us to view all the commits that we have made. So let's go ahead and do that. It's kind of like the log. Yeah, just based off that word there, log, it kind of gives you an idea. Oh, actually, I just want to clear. Okay, so if I run git log, it will show the very first commit that we made, which was called initial commit. That was the message that we used. And it also has a timestamp of when it was created. Antonio, I'll try to help you out after the meeting because we are also running a little bit short on time. So I apologize about that, but I'll definitely get back to you and help you out. I think it will just have to be something with the configuration. So we'll definitely take a look at it. And so now the other commands that we can run are git diff. And so what this command allows us to do is the very first one, it allows us to specify a particular file in the working directory and view the changes in it with the Git repository. So for example, let's say we go into our project and we go to this index.html file. And right here at this line, and if you're not familiar with what we're doing with HTML, that's totally fine. All I'm trying to show here is that whenever we make a change in our working directory, we can view the changes that we made using Git. So let's say inside of my HTML, I wanted to add a paragraph. And in the paragraph, I said intro to git/GitHub. Okay, and then I save that into my working directory. Now I can actually view the change that I made by going back to the bash and typing git diff followed by the file that was modified. So that's index.html. And so it'll actually show us here in the green, it has this plus icon, which means that this is what we added to our index.html file. And Antonio, you don't have to have Visual Studio open. You can if you want to follow along, but you don't have to. And so that's what the diff allows us to do. But let's say as we're working on our project and we make changes to so many different files. So like, of course, we have index.html, but let's say we go into this HTML folder here and we add something into the about.html file. Let's say we add a paragraph here and we say hello. And then let's say we go to this contact file and we add something here as well. Let's say we add a paragraph and we say hello from contact. And since we've modified 2 files now, with running git diff, we can see the changes in both those files without having to specify a single file. So running git diff, it'll show us these 2 sections here. This first one, it shows us in the change we made in about.html. We see that we added the paragraph in green. And then the other change we made was in the contact.html file, where we added the paragraphs stating hello from contact. And then if we type Q, it'll actually exit us out of the editor there. All right. So now we're going to talk about branch. So when we type first, what is a git? What is a branch? A branch is a segment, or it's an area where you have your code. So whenever we start off any project, we always have a default branch, which is called main. The main branch is typically where you want to have your most up-to-date software. No, it's essentially where you want to have your final version, your most recent versions updated before you put them into production. Or let's say you're building a software and you want to release something into production, you typically do it in your main branch. But then you can also create other branches which clone your main branch and allow you to modify those branches. So that way, whenever you make changes to those branches, they don't directly affect the main branch. So we'll go ahead and run an example here. So when we type in, let me just go ahead and clear this out. In our working directory, if we type git branch, we see that right now it's showing master. Master is the default branch name. I believe that GitHub is actually going to change it to main. They're going to change that setting there. But right now, by default, it's master. And if we want to create another branch for our own development purposes, we can do git branch, and then we can type in something like development or for a branch name. So once we do git branch, specify the branch name, it'll go ahead and create that branch. And so now when we type git branch, we have 2 branches available. We have the development branch and we have the master branch. And so now we can go into the development branch as well. So that is actually what we will do next. So the way that we can go to another branch is by running the git checkout command and specifying the branch name. It allows us to go from one branch that we're currently on to the next branch. So let's go ahead and test that out. So if I run git checkout development, because I'm currently in my master branch, and to confirm that, we can run git branch, and we see in the green it says master, so that's the current branch we're on. If we want to go to development, we just do git checkout. type in the branch that we want to go to. So we'll type in development. And so now it'll actually tell us switch to branch development. And again, just to confirm, we run git branch. And in the green, it shows development. So now we're on this other branch. And what's nice about this is since we're on the development branch, we can make whatever change that we want to inside of this branch here. And we don't have to worry about it affecting our main branch. All right, so let's go ahead back into, or actually we'll stay in the development branch. Another really cool feature of Git is that say you make a commit and you made a mistake when you made the commit and you want to go back to a previous version for a file. One way that you can do that is using git checkout followed by the commit that has the recent version of the file that you're trying to retrieve. So for example, let's say, since right now we're in our development branch, let's say we go into the index page and let's just go ahead and commit something that we didn't intentionally want to commit. So let's say made a mistake. And we didn't catch the mistake, but either way, we still committed that change. So we go into our branch, and once we do git status, we know, okay, we've modified these files here. So we'll go ahead and add those files that we changed. So we do git add and then git commit. I ran the git status just to see what has been modified and what isn't currently being tracked. So now all I'm doing is adding them back into the staging area. So that way Git is aware of the version of the software that we're trying to track. So we're actually doing that once we run git commit. So run git commit and we'll say added a change in index.html. Okay, cool. So we commit that change. And so what that means is now Git has a copy of the most recent version, which has the change that we made in index.html. And so that includes this change here. And one way that we can verify that is if we go ahead and run git log. When we run git log, we can see all the versions of the software that have been taken, that we have snapshots of. And so as we see here, our first snapshot was this initial commit. And then the next commit that we did was when we made the change in index.html, which we have here. But again, let's say that we come to realize that we didn't want this to be inside of index.html. Let's say we didn't want to commit that change and we want to go back to a previous version. So how do we do that? To do that, we can use the git checkout command. So we do git checkout and we have to specify the commit hash of the commit that we want to go to. And so to find that commit hash out, again, we do git log, and this is the hash code of the commit that we want to go back to, where it says initial commit. In the yellow text, we see 8765. I know it's really long, but you only need to write down like a few digits from this hash, and then Git will be familiar with what you're trying to do. So for example, if we want to go back to the initial commit, we just run git checkout and then the hash code, which is 87658. And I'm not going to finish everything else because it's really long, right? And so then we'll specify, we'll do dash dash, since we're trying to retrieve the previous version of the index.html file, we specify that. So we say index.html. Okay, and now when we look at our previous version of index.html, notice that the the text that we originally had is gone now. So initially it was saying that we made a mistake, but now it's no longer there. And we have to update that. We have to let Git know, because now if we run Git status, it recognizes that we modified index.html. And that was because we went back to a previous version of that file. And so since that is what we want to maintain inside of the local Git repository, we go ahead and add that change. So we do add, and then when we do the dot, it just means we're adding whatever files were reverted. And then we do git commit -m, and then say, we can say something like previous commit. And so that way now we're back to where we previously started, and we removed that commit that we had of the version that we didn't want. So I hope you guys found that one helpful. I know I did. I thought it was really cool because it gave me all the confidence to mess up whenever I'm working on something. So if I'm working on a project for school and I have something that I just want to test out really quickly, I can confidently just go ahead and delete whatever I'm working on and make the changes that I want to, and then go back to the previous version. So that way I know that I'll still have a copy of what I really want, and I can test things out. Another way that you can test things out is by creating branches. So as we mentioned, right now we're on the development branch, but we can also create another branch for testing things out and not having to worry about modifying the main version of the software that we want to maintain, which is typically the default branch called the master or the main branch. All right, awesome. So now there's this command here, git remote. And so now we're going to get a little bit into the to GitHub. So we've covered a lot of the most fundamental commands for Git, which can be used to help you manage the version of your software. Now we're going to talk about remote repositories. So when we run the git remote command, it will display to us available remote repositories, such as those configured with GitHub. So when we run git remote, right now, notice it doesn't display anything. So let me go ahead and clear that out and try one more time. So git remote, notice that when we type that in, it doesn't display any remote repository. And that makes perfect sense because we haven't configured a GitHub repository. But when we do configure a remote repository and we run that command, it will display whatever remote repositories that we have. Okay, so now we'll configure Git with GitHub. And the way that we'll do that is we'll visit GitHub. Let's say that we're happy with our portfolio website and we want to share it with GitHub so that way other people can see what we've been working on. The way that we do that is with GitHub, we can go ahead and create a repository. So going to your GitHub account, the way to create a repository is you go to your repositories in the drop-down menu. And when you're on this page here, you can click this green button, which is called new. And just give me 1 second, I have to mute this Discord here because it's seriously annoying. Sorry about that, guys. So yeah, so you can create a new GitHub repository. And so for here, we'll go ahead and say that this is called demo portfolio. Okay, cool. Demo portfolio. And we'll go ahead and hit create repository. Okay, Sorry, I was just trying to find what Discord is like going off right now. Apologize about the background noise, guys. And so here now it'll give us the commands that we can use to then push our local Git repository to GitHub. And since we've already initialized our local Git repository, we can run these commands here. Since what we're doing is pushing an existing repository from the command line. So let's go ahead and open up our bash terminal. We will run git remote and we'll do add origin. So what this will allow us to do is add the remote repository, and then we'll specify the URL for the repository. So you can actually you can highlight it or you can click this here. I believe it'll copy and paste, it'll copy the entire command. And so, oh, that was nice. So I guess it just copied and ran the commands there. So we did git remote add origin followed by the URL for the GitHub repository. And then once we ran that command, notice here when we do git branch -m main, I believe what that actually did was it changed our branch name. So remember how initially our branch name was master? When we run this command, this capital M -M, and we specify a name, we're able to change a particular name for the master branch, for the default master branch. And I believe this is because GitHub is actually trying to change the default master branch name to main only. And now we can run this command here, push. What push will do is take everything from our main repository and push it to the remote repository, which we called origin. And that's actually what we called it here when we ran the git remote add origin. It's the name of our remote repository. So let's go ahead and do that. Push, hit enter. And now let's see if we were able to push our changes from the local repository onto GitHub. So going back to the GitHub repository, if we click this link here for the repository name, now we can see all of our changes that we made from the local repository onto the remote repository, which is demo portfolio. And we see that this is from our main branch. And so now if anyone wanted to see what we were doing, or if anyone wanted to download this themselves, they can go to our GitHub URL and they can actually clone this repository. And this is really great as well if you're trying to show employers what kind of projects you're working on, and also collaborate with your teammates, anyone who wants to see your code. I know sometimes code can be very big in file size. So if you actually upload it to GitHub and you want to share it with your teammates, you can just copy the URL and share it via Discord, Zoom chat, or anything of that nature, because it's a big file size. So it's very easy to share it via remote repository. And so, yeah, and so we went over this command, git push. What that allows us to do is take whatever's in our local repository and push it up to a remote GitHub repository. And git pull, what that allows us to do is, let's say we make a change directly from GitHub, we can pull those changes in. So for instance, let's say we have this README file here. README is a file that's used for showcasing documentation work. If we were to modify it directly using GitHub, using the edit here, we can then pull those changes in directly to our local repository by running git pull. And So yeah, and I'm actually going to pass on that for right now because we're actually running a little bit out of time. I apologize, everyone. I believe this was supposed to be from 1 to 2 p.m. So I apologize we weren't able to finish everything, but I hope this was helpful for you all. We have recorded this workshop, so we will share it with you all, and you can play it back at your own time. And I know some of you did have some issues setting up GitHub, so please contact me via Discord. I'll actually share my Discord name here, and yeah, you can contact me on there, and I would be happy to help you all out. And yeah, just want to also give a shout out to Alfredo and Kenny. They were the folks who actually put these slides together.